So we have June 12th, and this morning the text is found in Deuteronomy 26, verses 1 through 11. I'm just going to read through it, and I think there's some interesting, some cool stuff for us this morning to consider. So again, this is God providing instruction and structure to his people as they are being formed into this this nation. He says, when you've entered the land your God, the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance and have taken possession of it and settled in it, take some of the first fruits of all that you produce from the soil of the land the Lord your God is giving you and put them in a basket. Then go to the place the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name, and say to the priest in office at the time, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. The priest shall take the basket from your hands and set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Then you shall declare before the Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramaean, and he went down into Egypt with a few people and lived there and became a great nation, powerful and numerous. But the Egyptians mistreated us and made us suffer, subjecting us to harsh labor. Then we cried out to the Lord, the God of our ancestors, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our misery, toil, and oppression. So the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror and with signs and wonders. He brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now I bring the first fruits of the soil that you, Lord, have given me. Place the basket before the Lord your God and bow down before him. Then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given to you and your household. So I thought that it was just a brilliant snapshot of what it can look like to give generously. So first off, there's this, offer your first fruits to God. In an agricultural and an agrarian society, that's their livelihood, right? So it's this whatever first fruits they might have from that land that God had given them, to offer that to God, but not just in this solely kind of like give God your crops. Like what is God doesn't need God doesn't need your crops. He made those crops, right? But we see there's something more to it. There's something, the act of participating in this is really, it's this movement, this act of remembering, because what you see in verse 3, it starts off, it says, say to the priest, I declare today to the Lord your God that I have come to the land the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us. And so there's the beginning of this process of giving the first fruits to God is this declaration of God's story. And so it starts off by telling God's story. And then it says, if you notice, it says, then the priest shall take the basket from your hands, set it down in front of the altar of the Lord your God. Then you shall declare before the Lord your God, my father was a wandering Aramaean, so he went down to Egypt with a few people. And so then it starts off with, telling God's story, but then the next moment, the next sort of step in that process of offering first fruits to God is to tell our story, to tell the ways in which we have been sort of delivered and set free by God. And so there's this cool interchange where we realize that this offering of the first fruits and the ceremony that's accompanied with that is this remembrance of who God is, and the fact that God's story and our story are in fact one. There's this remembering who God is, that he is the one who enters into our story to bring salvation. As you declare, this is the land that God promised, and then we reflect on the ways that God had delivered in the midst of that injustice and oppression, but then, of course, it ends. It doesn't just end with this, moment of, between me and God, God enjoying the first fruits that I offer from the land that he had blessed us with. But if you see in verse 11, it says, then you and the Levites and the foreigners residing among you shall rejoice in all the good things the Lord your God has given to you and your household. And so there's this acknowledgement that the first fruits, when we offer first fruits, when we offer back to God the ways that he has blessed us, that that brings blessing not just to ourselves, but to the community of faith, and then also beyond, right? So there's the Levites and then the foreigners. And so that there's this idea that offering our first fruits is this act of remembering God's story, remembering our story, remembering the intertwining of them, and that by offering our first fruits, there's blessing to the faith community, but also beyond. That the foreigners, the people outside of that community, are blessed by our generosity and giving of the first fruits. So I think it's a great snapshot of the kingdom of abundance that God invites us into, and too often we're guided by the kingdom of scarcity, that we get scared and we don't have enough, we could never give this because we need to hold on to what it is we have. And I think the quote this morning from Scott Bader say, following Jesus will mean surrendering the power that masquerades as security in order to love the neighbor and welcome the stranger. It will mean avoiding the safe path in order to pursue the good. But in a culture of fear, we find such risks all the more difficult, since our natural inclinations lead us to close in on ourselves when we face danger. How can we maintain the posture of the open hand toward a world that scares us? So may we be generous in a world that promotes selfishness, and when the temptation rises to close our fists toward the other, may we, with God's grace, keep them wide open. Amen.